The time has come. Sir 20 of House Good Elf is out and about, riding around town on his 6'4" Scourge Runner of the Gods, and the Rakarth update for Total War Warhammer 2 is updated and live. All of you guys should have access to it now, and today we're going to be jumping into the patch notes and discuss some of the major changes. Now, I'm pretty happy with situations like this one. They don't come around too often, unfortunately, but when there are massive updates for the game that are not tied to paid content, I am smiling ear to ear. I am a big fan of that because it shows that Creative Assembly is fully committed to improving this game in every way possible. I have never truly been a fan of the way they do patches and mostly tie their stuff to paid content, but when stuff like this happens, I have to praise it because there are some awesome changes here, and none of it is paid. We are all getting it for free, and there's some really nice updates on the way. So the first thing is for the Forge of Daith. Obviously not everyone's favorite mechanic for the Sisters of Twilight. A lot of people were quite unhappy with the way it was implemented, and we've had those symptoms where if you go up against Skaven in your Lord Pack DLC, you're in for a bad time because your mechanics are probably not going to be as well fleshed out as they should be, just because for whatever reason the Skaven seem to get the better end of the stick every single time. In this case, the Forge of Daith has been updated before. There's a little bit of a rework to it right after launch, and now we're getting an even larger one. So they have completely revamped the Forge of Daith here, and instead of being driven by dilemmas, the system will now have a bespoke panel that offers greatly improved visibility and choice regarding which items you'll be able to get. Now that the player has full agency over what items they can unlock, upgrade, and reforge, and in what order, they've decided to tone down a few items due to the ability to chain reforge them all the way up to level 3. So, the Forge of Daith has always been powerful. That was never really the issue. The problem was that when these dilemmas would come up and you'd get the option to get Arahan's side of it, where you could temporarily steroid boost an item into oblivion, well, once that buff disappeared, because it was for a short duration of time, then it would reset whatever that item was, whether it was level 3 or level 2 or whatever, back to its level 1 state, which did not make for a very enjoyable experience. So that is no longer a problem. You can now pick and choose which items to get. You don't have to worry about whether you'll get one of the awesome items or one of the more mediocre ones. Some of the ones that were very powerful are now going to be a little bit less so. Dreaming Boots, for example, campaign movement going from 50 to 35. That's not a massive deal, but I will say that's probably one of my favorite items in the Sisters of Twilight campaign, because combine that movement range on the campaign map, you could have given that to any lord in your roster, combine that ability to just quickly move across continents, over land, and then teleport to the other side of the map. It meant that you had a very unique playstyle, a guerrilla playstyle, a quick lightning strike playstyle of being able to strike out anywhere at any time, just show up on a continent and just start blitzkrieging people down. Super fun. Looks like it's being reined in a little bit because you can now upgrade that specifically whenever you want. You'll have a resource, you get up to 3 of those charges, you can use them on whatever. If you try to get more charges than that and stockpile it, it won't work. It'll basically just be capped out at 3, so make sure you're spending those on upgrading frequently, or you'll lose out on any ones you earn during battle. So you can see those there. Interesting. I think that's a nice rework overall. I think it'll be a nice little buff to the Sisters of Twilight, at least in the terms of being able to pick and choose which items you want. Now this is where we're starting to get real juicy, because some of the older Dark Elf lords, as we well know, were not implemented particularly well. Malice Darkblade, Lokhir Fellheart, Crone Hellebron, they've had issues in the past, and to see Creative Assembly go back into some of those campaigns and start fixing them up, making them feel a little bit better is pretty nice. I have generally never been a huge fan of the campaigns where a certain lord starts out with large malices. Those are typically not the most fun mechanics to go for. I get why some of those would have a logical lore application, but in the case of Crone Hellebron, it did feel like some of those mechanics were pretty punishing in the early and mid stages of your playthrough, and generally people don't like to play campaigns where they feel like they're being punished simply for picking that lord. In that case, a lot of people would rather play Malekith or Marathi or someone else and then just confederate that lord. That way they get all the bonuses of that faction and none of the detriments to it. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these buffs and nerfs. You can kind of do that on your own time, but generally speaking, they have reworked Blood Voyages to be a little bit more powerful. There have been a few nerfs on that side as well. The armies are no longer unbreakable, but instead they get greatly increased movement range and they have perfect vigor army-wide. And they can replenish in enemy territory. So you won't see what was typically the thing that characterized Blood Voyages was that element where they would just kind of fizzle out and not do a whole lot after a while. They just lose stuff to attrition, they'd lose a battle, or have one where they lost some executioners, and then they'd be fighting at half strength, then quarter strength, then over time they would just fizzle out and completely disappear. Now they can replenish, which is a big deal, and one thing I will say about these kind of effects on the patch notes, I would really appreciate it, and I get that it would take a little bit more work, but there's a lot of unused space on this page here. It'd be super nice to see what the old effects were and see what the changes are. Or they could just implement the patch notes and say, instead of plus 10% physical resistance, you're getting plus 10 extra. Something that makes it clear what the old stat was and what the new stat will be. That makes it a lot easier to compare between the two patches and see what the changes actually are. So I can see all these things right here, but they don't necessarily mean a whole lot to me, because obviously I'm not going to remember every single buff and nerf that came with Death Knight from before the patch. So that is something I think that would be a nice little quality of life change Creative Assembly could implement in these. But yeah, so Blood Voyages are no longer unable to replenish. They're getting some pretty substantial buffs here. 20% physical resistance for Crone Hellebron, Witch Elves, Sisters of Slaughter, pretty much any K-Knight unit. Perfect Vigor, army-wide, plus 6 Public Order, plus 10 leadership for all armies. Yeah, it's good. Hellebron should be more fun to play after those changes. That's what I like to see, and she's not the only lord, not the only Dark Elf lord, getting some buffs in this patch. So she also got the Greatest Bride of Cain, so a new skill, grants increased weapon strength for all Knight units, and Champion of Cain, Witch Elves, and Hargoneth Executioners, getting some missile resistance, which is pretty huge for both, honestly. Hargoneth Executioners have, I believe, 100 armor, but they still feel pretty squishy to focus missile fire, as frankly most units do in this game with the way AP works. Even if you don't have a high AP split, the component that is armor piercing of your missile damage will still go through and bypass your armor. So situation where even if you have 120 plus armor, you can still get focus fire down, and that can kind of feel a little bit bad. So missile resistance will certainly help there. Witch Elves are naked. They could use all the help they could get on that front. So nice little change. For Lokhir Fellheart, another of the lords that has kind of been in a, I don't know if I'd call it a sorry state, but he really kind of feels lackluster, especially in comparison to someone like Rakarth. And now he will actually be able to outperform someone with a name of power, which was not the case before. If you remember that Kraken Claw trait, it's a name of power, maybe I can't remember if it's aristocratic or which one it falls under, but it's one of the names of power for Dreadlords, and it would give 100% missile damage, armor piercing increase, and 100% AP damage increase for the melee variant of Black Art Corsairs. That's obviously very strong, and that made a Kraken Claw Dreadlord more powerful, essentially gave him better bonuses to Black Art Corsairs than the Kraken Lord himself. That is now no longer necessarily the case. We'll see. So the Black Arc that he starts with, the Blessed Dread, is now a bespoke special agent type, has a unique innate trait called Kraken's Claw, which provides increased base Black Arc growth. You get 2 unique level landmark buildings, the Tower of the Blessed Dread, which gives you increased movement and additional bonuses to nearby armies. It has its own variant model now, and the Prite of Aneth Rama, the Savage Huntress, has been reworked. You get plus 50% sacking income, plus 50% raising income, plus 10 Black Art growth, and plus 20% movement range for 5 turns. That is going to be a pretty powerful right, especially if you're going on the offensive, if you're doing your raiding, you're pillaging. This is exactly the kind of thing that makes Legendary Lords fun. You go for the thing that is their innate trait in the lore, and you focus on that, you buff that, you give them bonuses to that, and it makes their campaigns pretty much automatically more entertaining. This is exactly how you want to design a Legendary Lord. So for skills, Kraken Lord, innate trait, causes fear for Corsair units now. That's pretty big in and of itself. Map-wide, if you're rocking a Corsair build, everything is causing fear. Immune to deep sea, storm, and reef attrition. Also a very nice and thematic addition. Bound by blood, +5 public order. Don't really care. That's not super interesting, but sure, it's cool. Corsair Noble. Okay, so Corsair Noble, 100% armor-piercing missile damage for Corsairs. If you remember, we just talked about that is the ranged variant. They now have the exact same trait that they have under a Kraken Claw Lord from the Name of Power. I think it actually is a militaristic Name of Power. And so those are the ones that buff your army. This case, yeah, they're getting it. Now, it's only half of that trait. We are not seeing any evidence of the plus 100% AP damage for the melee variant, which I'm a little bit sad about, but I guess they're thinking on Creative Assembly's end is that they're buffing them up in other ways, and they felt that maybe that'd be overpowered. Frankly, I would like to see that same buff applied to the melee variant too. That's the unit that I'm more interested in. Even with this buff, I personally don't think I'll use hand bows too often. It's not that they're a bad unit, I just don't find them particularly entertaining to use. I'd rather just use the melee variant as my front line and let that be as it may, but still, that's super nice. That will make them more viable into the late game, and this is exactly what I want to see for some of the lesser used units for every roster in the game and campaign. If it's a unit that is trash in campaign, like Harpies, good multiplayer unit, bad in campaign, if you're going to buff them, they need to get more buffs than a typical Hydra or some other unit like that, because those units are actually good. If it's a bad unit, it needs more stuff to make it viable. This is exactly the kind of trait I like to see from Creative Assembly. They should do this more often. So Vanguard, stock for Corsairs, all that is great. You get more Black Arc Bombardment abilities, and Patriarch of the Fellhearts gives you, well, changes from +3 to +5 Lord Recruit rank bonus. Nice. Minus 75% right cost for sacrifice to Anathrema and sacrifice to Mathland, so that's your Black Arc summoning. And then +8 melee attack when fighting at sea for every unit in your army. Awesome. That is a really nice rework for Lokhir Fellheart. I think that's going to make him a lot more fun to play in campaign, and it basically just touches every element of what was making him not fun. Now, I will say shipbuilding is still something I would like to see for him. I feel like some of those Vampire Coast mechanics would apply quite nicely. I don't think we'll ever get it. That is probably the last time we will see Lokhir Fellheart touched in campaign, barring some kind of issue with his implementation here, some unforeseen bugs. But yeah, I think he could still use a teeny bit more loving, but overall his status is much better than it was previously, so that's nice to see. Morathi got a little change to a right. Don't care too much there. Supreme Sorceresses. They now have Bound Spell, Arzapal's Black Horror. Weird to give that to a Supreme Sorceress and not to Morathi, considering she is the premier, the upper echelon of Dark Elf, Dark Magic casters. Weird to not have that spell, because she does have it in the tabletop, I believe. Also, kind of a weird implementation of the spell in general, that it's a bound spell that you just don't see very often. I seem to remember it was a part of Dark Magic, and I guess they just cut it out for something else. I can't remember what they replaced it with. But yeah, we didn't get to see that too often in multiplayer or campaign. Now that that's a bound spell for Supreme Sorceresses, maybe we'll see it a little bit more. Okay, so the naval-themed units for the Dark Elves are now immune to Deep Sea and Reef Attrition. It's not just the Corsairs, but Charybdis as well. Seems largely thematic. Fan of that change for sure. And the cooldown for Black Arc Bombardment abilities will no longer increase in duration as the ability is upgraded. So they all start at a 60-second cooldown. Now it won't be going up much higher than that. It won't be going up at all. That makes sense. If you're investing a lot of money into upgrading your Black Arc and getting a more impressive Cain's Lash, more impressive bombardments and vortexes from off the coast, well then you certainly don't want to see it going up to much higher cooldown. So I think that's also a pretty nice change there, nice little quality of life thing. Driven by Vengeance now grants +4 melee attack to Bleak Swords, Dread Spears, and Black Arc Corsairs, and Naval Training does the same thing, just only at fighting at sea. So, okay, the Skaven are incredibly obnoxious to fight against. I think we all know that. They're probably the most annoying faction to fight in any playthrough for anybody, whether you're playing as Emmerich or Malekith or whatever. Skaven, especially their corruption, is going to be a problem. So essentially, we're not going to go through every change here, but the big changes are that they've changed stock and the campaign prioritization so that AI factions will not prioritize getting that ambush chance up so much. Is getting ambushed by Skaven just from them stalking around and attacking you by right-clicking your army. Even though you saw the army, yeah, it's kind of obnoxious in that way. And Skaven corruption has been reworked entirely. I'd say that's probably the big change here and the one that's going to affect most of our play sessions. So, essentially what the problem was that tons and tons and tons of buildings in the Skaven building chain caused Skaven corruption, and they had huge multipliers to corruption in adjacent territories. So if I'm Lokhir Fellheart and I'm in Chupa Yodel and Lord Skrolk is nearby, well, just by his very existence, insane amounts of Skaven corruption are going to creep into my settlement, causing public order penalties, causing all kinds of issues. There were too many buildings that were causing it. It was too easy for them to passively turn territory that didn't belong to them into Skaven favored territory. So now they've reduced the corruption on a lot of these things. They have made a lot of the buildings that previously caused Skaven corruption to now cause untainted. I think that is going to make them a lot more pleasant to fight against, and it means you'll be dealing less with all those public order problems, attrition, what have you. Very obnoxious. So literally, I mean, look at this change right here. They have halved the Skaven corruption in adjacent regions from 6 to 3. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. Menace Below has been reworked. It looks like there were some issues with the way it was being calculated. Other things here, I mean, reduced, okay, well, I think we also know how annoying it can be to siege Skaven territories. Warp Bomb is one of those problems. Personally, for me, by far the most obnoxious element of sieging a Skaven settlement, even one that is not well defended, is that they will almost invariably have a Warlock Engineer, and he'll be dropping Warp Lightnings with pinpoint accuracy. I don't think that is being addressed here. AI Warp Lightning is terrifying. It is better than any top tier spell in the game. I think I have lost more of my elite units, models of elite units, to Warp Lightning than literally any other enemy. Period. Doesn't matter if it's spell casting, doesn't matter if it's a Blood Knight, what have you. Warp Lightning is just brutal in the hands of the AI. They seem to never miss, and it does an absurd amount of damage for something that's so spammable. So they're reducing some of the other elements of the Skaven sieges that were kind of annoying. Spamming of Warp Bombs, spamming of Menace Below, those kind of things. They'll be more pleasant to fight against, and of course, they're also changing some of their units in the unit balance section, which we'll get to pretty soon here. There was some overpowered stuff that is being reined in on that side. Less plagues, less attrition, less annoyance. I'm happy. Here is a big change. Okay, so they made some changes to how growth worked for a lot of factions, and by reducing it, it meant that certain ones, like the Tomb Kings and the Dwarfs, who already have really low base growth, well, their campaigns, I wouldn't say they became unplayable, but they became a lot less palatable, because you'd have to spend an absurd amount of time getting your settlements to level 4, level 5, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I don't think this affects the Dwarfs, so they might still be having problems. It has been a while since I played a Dwarf campaign, so I couldn't tell you exactly what their state is in at the moment, but I do know the Tomb Kings were having serious issues getting their settlements leveled up. Now that the base growth has been increased by around 20%, that should be less of an issue. So, certain factions, well, on the higher difficulties especially, they just wouldn't grow. Sounds like Dwarfs aren't being fixed here. Who knows? Maybe they're in the next DLC against Beastmen. Maybe they'll be fixed then. I don't know. I honestly have no idea who the Beastmen will be fighting against. Again, I expect that it will be a Beastmen Lord pack. And we have doubts about whether it'll be Game 1 versus Game 1 or Game 2 versus Game 1. But if it's Dwarfs, maybe that's what they're saving it for. To buff that up once a Dwarf patch comes. If not, might have to wait till Game 3. Sorry, boys. Okay. The balance changes. There are some big ones here. I'm not really too worried about any of this, to be honest. It just is changing the visuals, not actually the real battlefield performance, so I don't think any of us will really notice that too much. Beastmasters on Scourge Runner Chariots. Beastmasters in general have been nerfed, which is maybe a little bit weird, but I think it's kind of just making... Well, okay, no, it's making it a more defensive unit. So it's melee attack down from 60 to 50, and then melee defense up from 45 to 55. So that's something to do with Rakarth, I'm sure, just to give them a little bit of a slightly different role, or to give Rakarth his due as the greatest of the Beastmaster Lords. Scourge Runner Chariot change, none of this is particularly impactful, and the melee bonus for Sludge down from 25 to 15. Okay, now the Wood Elf changes and the Skaven changes are going to be the big ones. As we well know, when a DLC comes out, whoever's in the Lord pack is probably going to get some pretty OP stuff. That's how Credo simply likes to push product, I guess. It's kind of been a theme across all of this stuff. So, reining it in now, a couple months after launch, and Ariel was certainly one of the slightly problematic units. So, in multiplayer, very strong. I don't think this will actually affect her. In fact, this will mostly be a buff in campaign. You're really not going to be in a situation in campaign unless you really messed up, where Ariel has a chance of routing anyway. So now she has more mass to push through units, and she has more mass to not get knocked over. I don't know if this will change her being on her ass all the time. I mean, she has Al Gorbel syndrome for sure. She has an issue where pretty much anything bigger than a slave rat will just completely send her flying. I don't know if 500 mass will change that, but it should certainly help. She is now no longer unbreakable. Leadership's down from 100 to 90, which means that she can route, but still, she will be essentially unroutable until endgame, unless you're screwing up with her pretty bad. So, this is a nerf to her in multiplayer. There are some toxic Wood Elves builds right now, but in campaign, it really shouldn't impact you in any way, shape, or form, unless you were literally just abusing her by sending her solo into the middle of enemy armies and dropping Dwellers Below or something. Glade Lord on Great Stag. So these both, the female and the male version, had an issue where they were not armor piercing on top of their majestic mount, which was obviously unfortunate. It's kind of annoying that for something that obvious, we have to wait months and months for it to get fixed, but it's finally fixed now, so we can be happy about that. Yeah, I think that having armor piercing on a armor piercing mount is logical. Before, they were not AP majority, which was weird considering that the mount is one of the big things that it adds is AP. So that was bugged. It is now no longer bugged. They are attacking correctly and they will hit harder as a result. Lost Sylvan Knights, pretty overpowered regiment of renown, incredibly strong. They have lost some HP per model. 157, they've lost about 24 models. That's, I think, like 450 HP. If my math is, I just did that in my head, and sometimes I'm a complete idiot. I failed calculus, or got a D in calculus in college, so don't expect a lot from me, okay? I'm not a smart man, Jenny. If my math is wrong on that, just use a calculator, whatever. Okay, Giant Wolves. I've not played Dreich's campaign, so I don't actually know what this is referencing. When I read it, I would imagine that there is a building chain that buffs Giant Wolves melee damage by 40, and now that's reduced to 5, which sounds really substantial. If I am completely wrong on that, someone in the comment section let me know. I'm not 100% sure what that is addressing, but it's the same thing for the Norskin Ice Wolves, so there are only two things it could be referencing. Either a building that does that, which I don't remember there being one that buffs that substantially, but I do know that Dreich's Wolves can get really strong, so maybe that's a part of it. The other thing I can think of is that their melee building damage would be like the damage they do against gatehouses might have been too strong, and they're nerfing that in. I really have no idea, so someone else can break that down for me in the comments. I'm not sure. Let's move on to the stuff that I do know what I'm talking about, and that would be Skaven, Brought the Unclean, Brood Horrors, and some of those overperforming Skaven units. So, Brought the Unclean completely broke the boundaries of what monstrous mounts are supposed to do. So, For a monstrous mount, you are not supposed to retain your Footlord stats. You are supposed to lose some of your melee attack and some of your melee defense, generally speaking, depending on who you are. Obviously, some crappy mage sorcerer will get better stats on a black dragon. But as a combat lord, someone like Rakarth or Malekith or Tyrion, you will have, well, obviously you can't mount on a dragon, but you know what I mean. If Tyrion was to be able to mount on a dragon, he would obviously no longer be running around with like 85 melee attack. That's not a thing. They lose some melee attack, they lose some melee defense, but they gain terror, they gain increased weapon strength, they gain the additional benefits of mobility and being able to rear charge whenever you want, that kind of thing. Throt broke that trend by getting 55 melee defense, which is basically Footlord defense on a big, fat, naked mole rat. That should not have been a thing. He was also able to push through enemy infantry formations very easily. When you combine all that with a regenerating 95 speed behemoth, well, things start getting pretty ridiculous. Essentially, dealing with brood horrors became very, very difficult because they had tons of mass. You couldn't really pin them down easily. When you finally do rout them, well, they're regenerating the whole time, so they'll get a ton of HP back. And once they have Scurry Away active, it's not 95 speed, it's more like 112 speed. You can't catch them with anything in the game, period. You can't chase them off the map. They're too fast. They will get enough space, run away, they'll come back, and they'll be healing the whole time. So that is being reined in. Now, the biggest issue for me with Brood Horrors is that they should have never had 95 speed to begin with. I believe they had 8 movement speed on tabletop. That is more like 80 speed. It's definitely not 95 speed. 95 speed would be movement speed 10 on tabletop, roughly equivalent. So yeah, the fact that they're moving at 95 speed is the biggest issue. If they were more like 78 or 82 speed, they'd be a much more balanced unit. Either way, they are getting nerfs here. They will not be able to push through formations as easily. They have lower melee defense now. Their missile resist has been changed from 15 to 0, so they'll be more susceptible to handgun volleys, crossbow volleys, those kinds of things. So definitely good changes. Wolf Rats, melee defense lowered from 21 to 19. Make them a little bit less impactful. Now, unfortunately, the Lizardmen have a casualty here. The Ancient Salamander has been over-nerfed. It was super busted on launch day, and here's the thing. This is why I wish Creative Assembly would not release units in these brokenly overpowered states, because what happens then is people have a ginormous backlash to the unit, and they want it over-nerfed. Instead of over-nerfing the unit, maybe implement the unit so it's not broken on launch day. People won't have that kind of backlash, and then we can kind of make little tweaks here and there instead of just dumpstering their combat potential. I would not say Ancient Salamanders are horrendous, but no one uses them in campaign, and they are only rarely used in multiplayer now, from a unit that was just stupid good when it first came out. And this seems like, I think it's a fine change in and of itself. At the same time, it's not a melee monster, so it's not going to be running into melee and beating up on stuff anyway, like a Brood Horror will. And this seems more just like a normalization thing. It's not an actual, like, I want to nerf the Ancient Salamander. But if you're going to do this, and it is a nerf to the unit, intended or not, they should get something extra to buff them up a little bit, because I don't think they get used very often now in either game mode. So I think Ancient Sally could use a little bit of love. Maybe that's something we'll get in the next DLC if it happens to be something like a Pedo Echo or Oxyotl versus Torox or Moonclaw type DLC. If it's Lizardmen versus Beastmen, maybe that's when they will decide to rebuff the Ancient Sally to make it more usable. Now, this was a very confusing patch note. I don't know how to interpret it. So Whiplash is the ability that Rakarth can use either on his own Black Dragon or Manticore when he's riding atop it, or on any monsters in his army. And what this does is give them big increases to charge speed, charge bonus, weapon damage, all that stuff. It's a single target buff for a friendly. What I'm confused about is that the way they phrase this here makes it sound like it's about the Whip of Agony. Large entities, well, it can only target large entities, but is no longer prevented from targeting lords and heroes. So the Whip of Agony, its tooltip says that it cannot target lords or heroes. Now it says Seraphon quails in fear. I don't get why they would phrase it like that, because Whiplash, that wouldn't affect Seraphon in any way. The Whip of Agony would. The Whip of Agony is a single target debuff that lowers melee defense by 24 and makes them susceptible to fear and terror. So I don't know if they're intending this to mean Whiplash or if they're intending that to mean the Whip of Agony item. Those are two separate things. It's a little bit confusing. I booted up the game and it still said, the tooltip still said that Whip of Agony cannot affect lords or heroes, but I don't know if that's the case. Again, Whiplash can't affect enemy lords or monsters anyway. It's a buff to your own faction, not the enemy faction. So this line and the prevented from targeting lords and heroes thing, it's I don't get it. Maybe someone can break that down for me, but the wording is very confusing, and I think they might be addressing a unit or a ability other than the one they wrote there. So we'll see. Some changes to. Ooh. Never mind. For some reason, I thought that was crumbling for Skaven summons. It is not. Acorns of the Ages, so another nerf to Ariel a little bit. AP damage down from 12 to 10. And wind up time from 1 to 3 seconds. This is very good. In general, in multiplayer, if it is a damage spell, it probably should not have instant cast time. 1 second cast time is undodgeable. You cannot get out of the way ever. It will hit you. That's kind of dumb for a bound spell ability that costs nothing to bring, that does as much damage as it did. So good change there. And in campaign, it's not going to matter. The AI is not going to dodge out of the way, so who cares? Conjoined Destiny can now be cast infinite times for the Sisters of Twilight, but I think one is going to hit you at the healing cap anyway, so I'm not sure what the practical importance of that is. Maybe if you're talking like SFO where there's no real heal cap, you can get infinite healing with the Sisters from that change. I don't know why they made that. I'm not sure what that does. Roused to Wrath, bit of a nerf to Drycha, who's been a very good lord since she was introduced as the free LC. Now she can only summon 1 Dryad instead of 2. I don't think that needs to apply to campaign, and I'm not sure that it does. She might have a skill that lets her summon 2 Dryads in that anyway. This is one of those things where I think, yeah, in campaign, it's cool for her to have 2 or 3 or whatever. She should certainly have a skill that allows her to increase the amount she can summon. I think that would be a nice addition if it does not already exist. In multiplayer, yeah, I think that's pretty balanced. I think being able to summon 2 Dryads, Malevolent Dryads, a very good unit in their own right. It's about 575 gold worth of unit. Yeah, it's good. Transformation of Kadon, the Eagle summon has been reduced in Winds of Magic cost. Good. Eagles are worse than Manticores. They don't rampage, which is nice, but they don't cause terror. They're less effective in melee. And Ancient's Protection, 10 to 12 seconds. Okay, Cloak of Isha for Orion, the King in the Woods. This has made him almost unkillable in the late game. That change, that buff to 44% when he gets low, regen, and 44% ward save against all physical attacks was super strong. They're reining it in now. It's 20%. I think Orion will be fine, but he will be less of a complete game changer, which is alright. I mean, he'll still be quite tanky in endgame when he's low with a 20% physical resistance ward save and that regeneration. So overall, no changes to Malice, which is unfortunate considering all the things we saw with Rakarth. Maybe that will come a little bit later. Maybe that will come in game 3 when there's a more heavy focus on demons. But addressing a lot of the Dark Elf Lords that were kind of in the trash can, I'm quite happy with. Lokhir will be more fun now. Hellebron will be more fun now. Skaven will be more fun to fight against. They'll be less annoying. And some good balance changes overall, reining in the OP stuff from the last patch. So overall, quite happy with the Rakarth update. And I think moving forward, I hope to see more of these balance changes, irrespective of whether it's coming with paid content or not. Great work from Creative Assembly. Quite happy with everything here, and hope you guys are as well. Let me know what you think about the patch and what you think about Rakarth's campaign and playstyle in the comment section below. And I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.